I still can't get over the fact that it is, generally we're talking about a text that's advising restraints, though. I mean, would you disagree that? I mean, I go down a certain way, as I think it's, I'm not saying it has no use. It has an incredible benefit in restraining one's senses and in the kind of eka-tattva principle of concentrating one's mind on something, at least for part of the day, and restraining those kind of desires into perhaps, reducing them into the more sensible ones, let's say. But I think, the thing is, by degree, I find it, if I can read it practically, but I don't feel that I'm reading it honestly. I feel that he's asking utter restraint. I mean, I was reading it yesterday to a little preparation for this, and I mean, I was looking at, and perhaps you've got a different interpretation of this point, but and he says, like in Sutra 215, Dukam eva sarvam vivekana. So this one, he seems to say, well, unless my translation is wrong, even for the wise person, everything is suffering, right? I mean, we have this kind of negation kind of viewpoint, this ascetic viewpoint in there, and it's not what we want. You're not doing it. I'm not doing it.
I don't think it's a question of doing. It's a statement of fact that a wise person recognizes that every vritti is a cause for some kind of suffering. If you're absolutely, devoted to the path, but who is absolutely devoted to the path?
Well, I totally agree with that interpretation, but that's not exactly what Pattanjali is saying. He's saying, like, well, any thought is suffering, therefore he doesn't leave, just kind of throw that out. I'm sure that the tacit emphasis is transcend.
Context, that is, for the wise person, all is suffering. For the not so wise person, we like a little bit of pleasure, we enjoy our coffee and a glass of wine, and etc., etc. So we're not, he's giving the possibility for every color of the rainbow. I think, but he's just saying,
You reckon? I think that's a nice idea. I like the idea of potentially being quite liberal like that.
I don't think he's prescribing.
And if it was read like that, I would be in utter agreement with you.
I think he's saying, if you want this, then that. How much of it do you want? How much do you want? Do you want a little bit? Do you want a lot? Do you want it now? Do you want it later? Are you working towards it gradually? And all of us, we attracted to yoga through asana, and that's because we have some kind of physical obsession of some sort. I don't know what it is for every individual person, but our culture is just, it's all about the body, and whether it's concern about being healthy or being strong or being attractive or whatever it is, everyone's obsessed about looking good. So how you have to work your way through that ego, aspect of yourself, and attracting a mate and whatever it is, or impressing other people, or earning a living. You're not going to just go out on the street and just beg for somebody to support you in your yoga practice. You have too much pride for that at this point in time. But at some point, eventually, maybe that will be fine. You won't care. You won't need to buy clothes if you happen to walk around naked. When? And Pattabhi Jois say, it may take many lifetimes. I mean, that's a common theme. It may take many lifetimes. It may not be this time around for some of you.
What if you don't? What if you? I mean, that also kind of necessitates you accept transubstantiation of the body. What if you don't? Can someone benefit from the sutras who don't accept this viewpoint? Who simply, this is the life, and I want to get to the happiest place I can in this life, and so can they benefit from Pattanjali's idea of stopping the thought, and if there's no idea of graduation to high levels?
You can get happier through practicing brahmacharya, through food discipline, through tapas.
Right. Well, in your brahmacharya, that sounds pretty happy.
Full brahmacharya. No. Okay. Big serious.
I thought you'd be impressed.
And for from personal experience. Also.
Okay. There's a bit of levity there. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say, just how much do you want? How far do you want to go? How much happiness do you actually desire? Do you really desire to be happy, or are you happy being miserable? We like to complain.
Just getting back on the track of the yoga, the asana. Of course, on the asana front, I mean, what do you make of the sutra? I'm serious now. The sutra 113, Tatras, I don't know how to pronounce this word, Stitau Yatna Abhyasa. Sorry for any Sanskrit scholars or native speakers out there. So, steadiness, as I understand it, is something like steadiness is practice. How would you okay. He's talking about practice.
He's talking about
practice itself as
restricting the vrittis, how to overcome the afflictive vrittis. Now, Pattabhi Jois always used to quote the next sutra, such as Yoga Kala Nairantarya Satkara Sevarantar Bhumihi.
Yes, you love that one. Yeah,
kind of interesting in a way. But that sutra says that you have to practice for a very long time without interruption, with devotion to establishing Chitta Vritti Nirodha, not with devotion to doing a jump through. So it's interesting because I think you can mix and match a little bit if you like. I've never, the sutra you just quoted, I've never really thought about that in the context of asana. I think the one that we normally think about.
Well, broadly speaking, the characterization of any practice, just the quality of a practice is restraint, really.
Stitau means steadiness.
And I wondered if you had any other kind of ideas about that word. And steadiness, restraint.
Vyasa is the will to establish yourself in a state of steadiness. So I would say, even though we do, a lot of people love to do lots of different postures. The reason is because the mind is, tending to jump around all over the place. So if you want to put the mind into a good condition, first of all, you have to acknowledge that there are a lot of vrittis there. So, one posture per vritti, perhaps, over a few lifetimes. And then maybe, you get the stitau, you get some steadiness. You have to get it out of the system.
Yeah, maybe I was jostling to kind of see your...
As we said, the sutra really refers to asana is Sthira Sukham Asana, which means the posture should be steady and comfortable. So why do you jump around to all these different poses?
Sutra.
Pattabhi Jois used to say purification. I'd say if you're a Rajasic person, the only way to relax is to get a good bit of exercise, and then afterwards you can sit. On the other hand, you can also say, we live a sedentary lifestyle. Our lifestyles are not really very well suited to sitting in meditation. You sit in chairs. All these different postures can help you open the hips, sit nice and comfortably. And once you've done a few series for a few decades, then maybe you can sit comfortably and quietly, peaceful mind, and you've achieved the perfection of asana. But it takes a while.
So you think? I mean, I know that Krishna Mishra is very keen on the Yoga Sutras, and obviously, kind of related it to his gymnastic system, calling it Ashtanga Yoga. I mean, is there a direct correlation, or has asana somehow kind of gotten out of control and kind of eaten up all the other limbs that were meant to come? I mean, is one meant to just get stuck on this rung of the ladder, or is it a rung of the ladder which you're meant to ascend and bring it up with you, as it were? Or is it more like a circle where where it all relates to samadhi in the middle, and you're continuously kind of going around this circle, a wheel?
I think it's like this. And both Pattabhi Jois and Krishna Acharya said that the Yoga Kurunta was a commentary on the Yoga Sutra. So the commentaries are there to explain how the sutras should be interpreted, whether or not the Kurunta existed. Okay, put that on one side for a moment. Doesn't really matter. The point is that in our modern age, we have a lot of stress. We have a huge corruption of our bodies through all this weird food that we put inside, what we call food, we put inside our bodies with all these different additives and mass-produced sort of, I don't know, what we put in our bodies. Anyway, our bodies are totally screwed up. And our minds are full of stress, and we have a lot of trauma, and we live in a very, very disturbed environment, which wasn't the case, for those forest yogis way back when. And, yoga practices have evolved over time to address the needs of people in the context they're living in. So I think very often we see everything upside down. We think we get into doing postures, and we think this is yoga, and then we try and work backwards from postures to understand why postures are a part of yoga. Instead of saying, yoga is concentration. Oh no, I can't concentrate. What am I going to do? I'm going to have to get my body and mind into a good condition first, and then maybe I got a chance. So, if you look at it from that point of view, you can understand how asanas are quite useful in getting yourself into the right kind of condition so you can sit, because most people in the West, they can't sit on the floor for a start with their hips open, they can't sit comfortably, can't sit still for a minute. And most people don't even want to keep their mind still. You asked if people, they can't even keep their mind still. And you asked in the beginning, or in your blog post also, does anyone actually want to stop the mind? We're afraid of silence, right? We want to keep busy. We want to keep moving on from one thing to the next because we're concerned or worried about what happened. A void opens in your head, and my God, what's there? What's not there? What happens when you go into the emptiness?
Yeah. Or also, I would just kind of think, I don't know whether you've had this experience, maybe you would be candid enough to say, but I mean, if you reach this experience where, when he says, there's one part which is really kind of very poetic, and I really enjoy the imagery of it, where the mind, like a gemstone, is utterly pure, right? And then, so the experience and the experiencer and the experienced all merge into kind of one uniform experience. I mean, I kind of feel like also when he's describing these kind of experiences, it's like, well, if one has had this experience, you wouldn't just go, well, that's great, but I now going to use it in everyday life. I just kind of feel that it would be so life changing that it would, and it's meant to lead to, just the pursuit of that, and that in exclusion to anything else.
In the context of samapati, which my understanding is samapati is the progressive change that happens in the mind through repeatedly going into samadhi over and over and over. The mind becomes perfectly pure, such that whatever is placed in the mind or whatever is placed next to the mind is objectively perfectly represented there. That it's not skewed or not distorted by your samskaras, by your subjective perspective on things. I can't claim to be anywhere close to that kind of condition. I think you're trying to ask me, how is my samadhi?
Well, as much as I think if you've experienced these things that Pattanjali is claiming, and then it's like, I can't see that you would then want to come down and just kind of use them for a kind of material life in a more practical manner. I mean, as I said, I agree with a lot of what is said. In degree, I think it's very reasonable, but then it's like, well, how far do you want? And I think you agree in such a roundabout way, and is that how far do you want to follow this? I think the only thing is that potentially doesn't seem to be, at least in the sutras themselves, be giving this kind of rather pragmatic and kind of kind of diplomatic overview. He seems more definitive, right? He's quite firm in his aims and his aspirations.
Same thought, which is that he's presenting 3 different practices at least, and probably more. Can you imagine, even if you wanted to go all the way, that would just happen overnight? That suddenly your mind would blow, Kundalini would rise, and it's like all the grantees would get burst through, and suddenly you'd be like, you see white lights, and you wouldn't want to come back. I mean, have you ever met anyone who had that kind of experience? Yeah, really? But they came back.
Yeah.
Came back.
Okay, yeah.
My point is, it's a progressive, it's gradual progressive.
I think it's. I mean,
process.
the people actually, to be perfectly frank, the people that I've met that have had some kind of experience will say, like, one, I didn't do anything to get into this state of mind, and two, you might not necessarily want it if you came into this state of mind. It's not, then it kind of necessarily perceive it as better, just kind of almost a kind of mistake of consciousness.
Well, fair enough.
But that's a side kind of topic, I think, discussion.
Because I think those who have perhaps some kind of Kundalini type experience, it is a mistake of consciousness. It is perhaps not a wholesome progression, but something, a kind of problematic experience. I don't think that's what Pattanjali is talking about at all. My point is that for you and me, for your students, for the people in general who are interested in yoga, they could never dream that, they could dream perhaps, but it's not going to happen, but suddenly you're going to have like the white light more. It's gradual, it's progressive. And samadhi states, I believe, are absolutely real and normal, and you have them, I have them, everyone has them. It may be for a millisecond you have that experience, and it may be that sometime in the past, there's a past time in your, let's say in your childhood, or certain events that happened in your life where it was more prolonged, where you actually were really in a state of bliss, in a state of altered consciousness, not from taking LSD, but from, just, you were, something happened and you felt really, really good for a moment, and your mind stopped, and,
Absolutely. I've never experienced the kind of poetry that Pattanjali's spouting here. And that's another level of just the kind of level of experience. I mean, unless it's slightly hyperbolic, I've never experienced that level of samadhi, if we're going to call it regular everyday experiences. Somewhat somatic.
It's unfamiliar and blows your mind, and it's not like you're necessarily trying to sustain it. You might want to get out of it quickly. My feeling is, my understanding is, what I've learned from teachers and what I've learned from my own experience, is that samadhi does mean concentration. The first level of samadhi that Pattanjali talks about is called vitarka, which means with thoughts. Concentration on an object. With thoughts, how to get yourself into meditation, you have to think your way into it if you're using a concrete object. And I think, Newton or Einstein or any scientist who comes to like an insight, an intuition, it happens through this type of absorption. I'm sure you have the same experience. You think deeply about a subject, you're a philosopher, you're a deep thinker, and suddenly something comes to you and you're like, God, I've got to write that down. Where did that come from? This is samprajñāta. Where you come back from that moment where your mind stops and you've been deeply contemplating on something, you come out of it with some inspiration, some intuition, some knowledge. And that's something you want to go back to every morning. That's a very tiny little samadhi, but I believe that is a samadhi, and those samadhis grow progressively if you're interested in progressing it. So if you want to sit, you want to meditate, and you want to try and get your mind empty, in a way, I think of it more as a hypothesis, like something to test. I think yoga is kind of a science. Like Pattanjali says, this is what's going to happen if you do that. So let's try it. Let's find out. Why not? Because it's kind of fascinating. That's my perspective. I'm not telling you, you're going to see God, or you can stop incarnating, or whatever. I have no idea. But to me, To me, it's fascinating.
What a shame.
That's my personal interest. I did have some experiences when I was a kid.
Oh, the text is very interesting. Yeah. I'm definitely not in doubt of that. Really, very interesting. Yeah, I'm just kind of uncertain about its practical application. So finally, I wanted to come round to just ask you, like, if you were just knowing that our audience is, predominantly yoga practitioners, perhaps Ashtanga practitioners, how can, perhaps, in your view, they use this text more effectively? How can it enrich someone's practice on the kind of level of kind of reasonable, pragmatic instruction that you're talking to?
Well, I guess I'm not specifically talking. My own personal practice is not necessarily related to the text, although for many years I did study the text in depth and did my own translation and chanted it and all the different commentaries, and I found that hugely enriching. My interest in yoga has always been meditation or the philosophy, and much less in the physical practice. That was the sort of accidental afterthought that I got into the practice because I couldn't meditate. But I would say, from my personal experience, meditation it's where I wanted to go, and I enjoy it very much. I enjoy spending my time getting absorbed in it, and I feel that I can stop my thoughts, not every day, and I do get various different experiences through it: intuition, knowledge, insight. I think that's extremely valuable. And it does play into life. I think it gives a different perspective. The more you can become absorbed into that kind of idea that you're not the body, you're not the mind, it just gives you a lot more kind of confidence, helping you overcome.
Can people find that in Ashtanga, in the practice, of Ashtanga Yoga? Can people find this meditative? I mean, it's often described kind of in a popular way as a moving meditation. I mean, can it be? You feel it needs to be an exclusive devotion to meditation as well as an asana.
Every time you blink, you have a new thought. So just think about all the different movements you're making. Even if you're keeping the posture still, all that goes towards keeping that posture is stimulating more thinking. So I'd say absolutely not. Maybe at the end of practice, when you're exhausted, when you've eliminated some of your rajasic tendencies, you can sit. But most people, by the time they get to that point, they just want to do shavasana. They're trashed. So I'd say absolutely not. I mean, I'd say in the long-term trajectory, maybe you need to practice all these asanas for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. At some point, you'll be like, okay, I'm tired of that. I just want to sit. And that's kind of what happened to me. And that might happen to other people too. I think it's very hard if you're a teacher, though, because you feel as though you have to walk the talk kind of thing. Like, you should be practicing doing these postures. You're teaching these postures, you should be doing the postures too. And that means you don't really have time for meditation. So you don't really have time for meditation if you're invested in teaching the asanas, unless you're going to take 5 hours a day for practice, which is a little bit selfish, I'd say, if you have a family and so on. Of course, not everyone does. So yeah, I'd say if you're doing a lot of postures, then that's not really allowing you to meditate.
All right. Well, it was a nice little chat on the Yoga Sutras. I hope people found it useful. If you did, then don't forget to subscribe to what we're doing, or hit a notification bell, or whatever else you do on YouTube. Thanks, Guy, for coming on. And
Thanks,
great little chat. Thanks very much.